land acknowledgement that y'all could access that I'll go ahead and put in the chat, but I do want to read at least the main part of it. So it is, we acknowledge that we gather at Santa Rosa Junior College on the territorial traditional land of the Pomo and Coast Miwok people, past and present, and honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it throughout the generations. By offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm Indigenous sovereignty and will work to hold Santa Rosa Junior College more accountable to the needs of American Indian and Indigenous peoples. And so it is really important that we have a land acknowledgement, but also it's really important to take into account that it's only one step in the ways in which we start the movement of giving land back, and how and what does that look like, and what does that mean for all communities that now live on this land. So as I said, I'll put in the chat a little bit later down the road more information on that you could read. Also, every SRJC student that's here today could be entered into a drawing for AirPods. We, in collaboration with the student success teams, the Welcome Center, our House Intercultural Center, we are giving away AirPods for students that join at least 3 of our events throughout the semester. So if you go to any of our websites or any of our events, you will be entered into that. So again, I'll also put that into the chat. So just make sure that you're on the lookout for that. It doesn't matter whether you're in class today or not, you have access to getting into that opportunity drawing. And then make sure that you check out, there's so many more events. We try to plan as many events that we think that you're going to be interested in. So if you just go to intercultural.santarosa.edu, we always have events happening. Also this month is Second Chance Month and Abolition Month. And then it also is Arab History Month. So we'll do different programming around that. And then starting mid-April through mid-May, we also have API, Asian American Pacific Islander History and Heritage Month. So just be on the lookout for all those events. And then I'll go ahead and just do a really quick introduction. We have Guadalupe and Jessica with us here today from the Land Paths organization. They do really dope work. We've been partnering with them with this year, and we're really excited for all the work that they've been doing. Hopefully, all of you have read or have started to read Bless Me Ultima. It is by far my favorite book. Of the hundreds of books that I can now say that I've read through school and through my personal interests, it continues to be that. And so I'm really excited that we've been able to have this relationship with Rafael's Humanities class and with Land Paths, so we could get to understand and really make sense of Bless Me Ultima in a very specific way when we're talking about curanderismo and herbalism. So I'll go ahead and pass it over to Guadalupe and Jessica, and then Guadalupe and Jessica, whenever you want me to start sharing the slideshow, go ahead and let me know.
Thank you, Malena. Good morning, everyone. My name's Guadalupe Casco. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and ella. I am a bilingual field specialist with Land Paths, and I also identify myself as a Chicana in the cultural and political sense of the term. So I'm really excited to be here with you all talking about the Chicano experience as I see it and as I've lived it. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Lupe. Hi, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jessica Rodriguez. I'm also a bilingual field specialist with Land Paths. I use she, her, ella pronouns, and overall, I'm super excited to be here with you all. I know that our bodies aren't meeting, but our spirits are meeting online. And so thank you all for taking the time to be here if you chose to do that. And we really look forward to what we have to share with you all today.
Thank you. So do you want to do your grounding without the slides, Jess?
Yeah, could you stop sharing for 1 second? So I know that we all just started our day and we might have driven somewhere, we might have just made breakfast, we might have just gotten the kids up from bed or started their day. So I just want to take a minute to acknowledge that we're all here together and just take 1 minute to turn off your camera, grab something comforting, whether that be water, a snack or something in your room that is calming, and just have that with you on your side of your desk as we start today's presentation. We will be sharing a lot of beautiful things with you all today, but we will be covering some topics, such as family, colonization. We'll be talking about violence and the way that it shaped our experience as Chicano people. And so I know that can bring up a lot of feelings with you all. And so I invite you at any time during this presentation to turn off your camera if that feels best for you. So I'm going to run my clock for just 1 minute, and you can take deep breaths, you can sing a song, and just take really 1 minute to bring yourself into this virtual space with us. So I'm going to turn off my camera and I'll go ahead and start the clock. All right, thank you, everybody. Lupa and I just recently attended a training, and one of the things that they reminded us is that we never want to ask something of people that we wouldn't do ourselves. And I know that it took a lot for me and Lupa to be here this morning, and I envision that it was the same for you as well. And so I just wanted to, honor all of your stories and all of your time, and to thank you for being with us today. So we're here to talk about Bless Me Ultima and how that relates to the Chicano experience. But before that, we're going to share a little bit about the work that we do at LandPaths, and of course, as ourselves as people. Lupa, do you want to pull up the presentation for us?
Yeah, Malena's going to help us do that. Awesome. Thank you, Malena. Thank you. Next slide, please. All right, so we also want to take a moment to recognize that LandPaths also occupies land on Pomo, Coastal Miwok, and Wapo people's ancestral homelands. We have begun a reckoning process in which we are identifying ways that LandPaths can better support Native communities in this area. And it's a work in progress. So this is a journey that we have just begun, but we invite everyone here to go beyond a land acknowledgement and continue to learn about the Indigenous people anywhere and everywhere you call home. A tool that you can use to help you do that is Native Land Map, as you see here on the screen. This resource is managed by a Canadian Indigenous-led organization called Native Land Digital. This map is regularly updated with public contributions. So if Indigenous communities don't see themselves represented on this map, they can contact the organization and can be added. Also, in honor of the book, we would like to acknowledge the first people of Eastern New Mexico, the Apache, Comanche, and Pueblo Indians, whose ancestral homeland is where Bless Me Ultima takes place. Next slide, please.
And just a little bit about LandPaths. So first I want to acknowledge that we're not meeting out on the land like we usually would with me and Lupe. Right now in this moment, there's 50 of us on this call. And so to prioritize safety, we are meeting in a virtual space. But if you are interested in getting outside with me, Lupe, or the team at LandPaths, you can visit our website, www.landpaths.org. And we have a calendar there with some opportunities for you all to get outside on the land here in Sonoma County. And just really briefly, as a conservation organization, we exist to help foster love in the land in Sonoma County. And we do that through many different ways. We do that through youth programs, education programs, through summer camps, through stewardship work days, and outings and events such as this virtual presentation. Next slide, please. And we'll pass it to Lupe to get to the meat of today's conversation.
Thank you. So the first thing that we want to address is what is Chicanismo? And so as I go through, my brief explanation of what it means to me, and as I've learned it to be a Chicano, you can see through this artwork on this slide, the synchronization of different things, different times, and different parts of history that have contributed to the Chicano experience. So to me, Chicanismo is a cultural and political identity that has evolved throughout the decades and continues to evolve. In the early 1900s, it was a pejorative term used to demean working class Mexican and Mexican Americans. Later, during the Chicano rights movement in the 1960s, this word was reclaimed by Chicanos in the Southwest as a symbol of pride, hermanidad, or camaraderie that connects us to our ancestral roots. The term also adopted a political connotation that refers to coming into consciousness by la raza. A Chicano is also a mestizo who is proud of their indigenous roots and finds themselves living in the continental United States. Like any identity, the Chicano identity is fluid, it's ever evolving and changing, and it means different things to different people. So depending on who you ask, you will hear different things. And like any identity, no one's truth is wrong. So everyone's experience of being Chicano is their own and therefore true. Next slide, please. Another big thing, right, that we're going to relate to the Chicano experience is curanderismo. And before we dive into the following things, we want to take a moment to also explain what curanderismo is. So curanderismo translates to the act of healing. A curandera is she who heals. And could be any gender as well. It's a person who heals. There are many ways to heal in each culture, and every community has their own way. In Mexican and Mexican American communities, there are several types of curanderos that can specialize in different things, like hueseros, or people who deal with bones, parteras, or midwives, espiritualistas, or the spiritual guides, and hierberas, herbalists, among others. To many indigenous communities, human health encompasses the wholesome well-being of the mind, the body, and the spirit. Thus, illnesses can be seen as either biological events or a mix of supernatural occurrences with social, cultural causes and cures. Oftentimes, it's a combination of both, where something in the spiritual realm will manifest itself as a biological trauma on our bodies. Healers or curanderos have been around since people have been, and before we had the westernized idea of doctors and degrees and Western medicine. We have, as a human species, always have had our cultural healers, and it goes as well for the Chicano Mexican experience as well. And in the book Ultima, she is one of the most powerful healers because she has mastered and combined the knowledge and wisdom of both the physical healing in terms of herbalism and using plant medicine, as well as the spiritual healing traditions of her people. Thank you. Next slide, please. So Rodolfo Anaya, I think it's important to take a minute to really set the context for the book and what causes the emergence of Bless Me Ultima, because in the Chicano experience, we have and in other cultures too, there exists this term called magical realism, which is, like I said, in curanderismo, similar to curanderismo, it's the blending of the physical world with the metaphysical, right? So what goes beyond what the human realm can see. And so I think that out of this context in which Rodolfo Anaya found himself in while he was writing the book is what inspired the book to be written as it was. So Rodolfo Anaya was born in October 30th, 1937 in Pastura, New Mexico, after the Great Depression and into World War II. Bless Me Ultima, as you have all started reading, is also inspired by this time period, and specifically inspired by the events and occurrences in Rodolfo Anaya's actual life. So in his upbringing and his own coming of age in Eastern New Mexico. The novel Bless Me Ultima by Rodolfo Anaya is largely considered to be a classic work of the Chicano literary tradition. The book was published in 1972 during a wave of Chicano Renaissance and artistic Renaissance. Anaya's book has stood the test of time, continuously being read and taught in schools across the country. This book continues to reflect the experience of many Chicanos in their search for self-determination and self-discovery, and at its core, explore what it means to be a good person in this world. It is important to mention that, like cultural and traditional practices, including TEK or traditional environmental knowledge, Bless Me Ultima was banned in California, Colorado, and even in his own state of New Mexico, where copies of his book were literally burned. Most recently, in 2012, Arizona also banned this book in efforts to dismantle Mexican American Studies program. Thus, it's so important, and it's such a privilege for me to be here presenting to you all and having this discussion about this book and the work of Rodolfo Anaya, the father of Chicano literature, as some might call him. Next slide, please. So Ultima. In the novel, the characters of Antonio and Ultima are dynamic characters who represent the Chicano experience and symbolize themes of curanderismo, indigenismo, coming of age, and the importance of the natural world. Throughout the story, the main character and the narrator, Antonio, emerge as representations of what it means for a young man to come of age and become a symbol of the Chicano experience. His family history lays the groundwork for us to understand Antonio as someone who carries the ancestry of indigenous and Mexican heritage in his veins, as well as the Spanish blood through his connection with the Catholic Church. This hybridity is also elaborated through the character of Ultima, who embodies a representation of indigenismo through the practice of curanderismo, in which is a symbol of the natural world. And that's something very present and real in traditional ecological knowledge, which is what a term used to describe indigenous ways of living, being, and knowledge. In chapter 4, Ultima and Antonio walk through the llano looking for herbs and roots for Ultima's medicine. During this chapter, Ultima begins teaching him about the tradition of curanderismo, imparting lessons on how to be in good relationship with nature. For Ultima, and this is a direct quote from the book, for Ultima, even the plants had a spirit, and before I dug, she made me speak to the plant and tell it why we pulled it from its home in the earth. This is a practice that is written in the book as fiction, but it is often a common practice that is passed down from generation to generation. This is something that even my own grandmother shared with me about how to be in relation with plants, to talk to them and care for them so that they can in turn care for us. So gathering medicine from the llano, the natural world, is a reality in indigenous life and a common practice in curanderismo. Speaking to the plants is a way to respect their existence and to develop a good relationship, a reciprocal relationship with the natural world. Next slide, please. The connection to curanderismo gives Antonio an additional insight into how there are magical things in this life that are beyond ourselves, but have the power to help us heal and grow from the pain. This is the magical realism that he experiences and that we all experiences as humans walking through this earth. In the final chapter, Antonio's experiences converge, and he is able, amidst tragic conditions, to find some sense of peace in his struggles using the teaching that Ultima has imparted him. Here's another quote from the book. "And I made strength from everything that happened to me. And that is what Ultima tried to teach me, that the tragic consequences of life can be overcome by the magical strength in the human heart." This is a really beautiful quote because to me, not only does it represent and capture the Chicano experience, but it captures the soul of the people, of all people, what it means to be human, which is why I feel like this book is a great thing to read so that we can all see ourselves in some way or another represented throughout the book. And I also want to dive a little bit into what does Ultima represent in this book. And, you know, I think that it's fair to say that this is up to each person's interpretation. And like interpretation and opinions, everyone's response is valid. But to me, Ultima represents a syncretism between faith and spirituality. She is the roots, the ancestral wisdom, and the keeper of traditional environmental knowledge. For me, she also represents freedom of choice. She is a guide and a mentor in Antonio's journey, never telling him what to believe in or what to do. She is the duality of the physical realm and indigenous cosmology. She's Antonio's example of how to live in relation with the land and self-healing through curanderismo. She's one of his examples. And there are many teachings throughout the book that she imparts on him. And one of the teachings that she doesn't directly teach him, but is taught by Antonio's friends, Zico in particular, is about the golden carp. We don't have too much time to dive into the golden carp, but I think that it's really important to mention because it plays a really pivotal point in Antonio's development and coming into consciousness, because it pretty much spins his perspective and makes him question the reality of his life as told by the church. So as you're reading the book in advance throughout the chapters, keep a special attention to the golden carp and think about what the golden carp represents to you. What does it represent to Antonio? And why can only certain characters see the carp? And what is it that connects those characters to each other? Next slide, please. So at Land Paths, our knowledge keepers are our community members who share their own ways of healing through the land. At Bayer Farm, we have a powerful and wonderful group of women who share some of their remedios caseros or home remedies with each other and the public. This is a program called Farming for Health that has been going on for, I believe, the last 8 years. And through oral tradition and tending to a plot of medicinal plants, these women help each other to take back and reclaim their health for their own, as they remember from their own teachings in their lives. Plants are powerful medicine and a good way to reconnect ourselves with that reciprocal relationship that humans have with the earth. In the book, that often is referred to as also like the presence or the spirit of the llano. And we don't necessarily need to be curanderas or be connected to a curandera to be able to be in tune with the spirit of the natural world in which we are a part of. So now we are transcending beyond the book. We're taking aspects of the book that are true in our human experience. One way to reconnect with this presence and heal is to reconnect with our own elders and healers in our own lives, the keepers of this knowledge. If, for some people, life has thrown so many curves and so many things that, if people don't have these mentors or guides that can guide them into connecting to the presence or the spirit of the natural world, I guess what I'm trying to say is take solace that you can also do that for yourself, because each one of us as human beings, we are also sacred and carry a piece of that spirit within us. So we can be our own medicine and begin to learn how to use our own medicine and plant medicine in a respectful way that can connect us to that greater spirit. So up next, we will expand on why we must remember and why we're stressing that this high importance to honor the knowledge keepers in our lives. We will also share some information about some herbs that are both powerful and gentle, making them great additions to our own self-care practice. Some of these herbs are also mentioned in the book. Next slide, please.
All right, thank you, Lupe, for grounding us in the theory. So now we're going to switch gears and talk about our own lives and our own experiences. So throughout this portion for the next half hour, I encourage you to ask questions throughout the chat. And starting at 10, we will have a chance to answer any longer questions, so just keep that in mind. And so like Lupe mentioned, Ultima represents Antonio's guide. She helps him remember how to live in his world, not only as a young man, but also in the family that he is in and the role that he plays. And so I have a picture here of my grandmother, my mother, and my sister. And this is my knowledge keeper, my grandmother and my mother. And so in preparation for today's presentation, I read some books, I did some research, but I really spent time remembering the teachings that my mom and my grandmother gave me before I realized how important they were. And so here's that quote that Lupe mentioned earlier from Antonio: "For Ultima, even plants had a spirit. And before I dug, she made me speak to the plant and tell me why we pulled it from the earth, why we pulled it from its home in the earth." And why is it that she does this? The basis, the foundation of this is acknowledging that everything has a spirit and a presence. And so as I share these plants with you, you may not realize that they are medicine. You may not see them as medicine. And I want to encourage you to take a minute to reclaim your relationship with these plants and remember how sacred every single one of them is, just like how sacred every human being is. So if you could go ahead and go to the next slide, Malena. And so here I have a picture of more plants that we're not going to talk about specifically today, but these are plants that you might recognize. So we have cempasúchil, which is the bright orange flower on the far left. On the far right, we have maíz or corn, and In specific, we're looking at the silk that's coming out of the bottom, which is also known as pelitos. At the top of that tall green stringy thing is known as cola de caballo or horsetail, which is really exciting to me because that plant is actually indigenous to California as well as Mexico. And so there's a lot of cultural similarities on the way that indigenous people work with cola de caballo here, and also how it's worked with in Mexico and other places of the world. And the last photo we have there, the small yellow flower is known as rue or ruda, and it has a very stinky smell like vinegar. I'm not sure if any of you are familiar with it, but these are 4 plants that me and Lupe also grow up seeing all the time in our gardens, in our pantries, in our kitchens, on altares. And I just want to take a minute to acknowledge that every single one of these plants are extremely powerful. And so throughout the book, you will see that Ultima works with the land in a certain way, and she gives importance and value to every single being that she sees, right? And often we get caught up with things being the biggest, being the best, being the strongest, when really what's really important is the relationship that you hold with those plants. Can you go to the next slide, Malena? So remembrance as resistance is what I titled this picture here. And so here you have me and Lupe in various places in our lives working with plant medicines in various different ways. So something I want us all to remember is that we don't have to pick the plants. We don't have to dry them. We don't have to take them from the earth to learn from their healing and learn from their power. So every time you go and you sit next to a plant, every time you drink a cup of tea, every time you smell some oil from a plant, you are making that relationship stronger and stronger with these beings. And the more that you listen to them, the more that they'll listen to you and be there for you. And as Chicano people, as humans, wherever you come from, plants have always been there to protect and guide your ancestors, and they're still doing that today. We head to the next slide, Melina. And so I want to take a minute to acknowledging what happened to make us forget. And so I made this little diagram here of the things that come up when I talk about science and when I talk about medicine and when I talk about conservation. There's a lot of things that come up for people that we don't really realize made things be the way that they are, right? And so on the far right, we have our extreme comparison of the world that we live in today. We acknowledge that we live in a patriarchal society where men are offered opportunities and safety that women and people of other genders are not. We acknowledge that colonization and religion has a long-lasting effect on the globe and that we are still feeling the ongoing legacies of colonialism today. As a scientist, I acknowledge that all science everywhere comes from indigenous people, that what we call traditional environmental knowledge is the first form of science throughout the globe, wherever you may be. And as people, at this time in society, there's a big importance on being the best, being number one, being that expert, you know, all about you. And what we really want to root ourselves back in is in the theory of collective thinking. So remembering that my health is interconnected to the health of all of you today. And I think as we move through this global pandemic, we are just being reminded of that every single day, that if the person next to me is not okay, that I'm also not okay as well. And lastly, because we will be talking about medicine and health, if I am sick, what I need to do is call my doctor, make an appointment, and get a prescription. And so our medicine is given to us through an industry. And so that can be very great for some people, but at the same time, there's a lot of folks that we exclude in that. So what is it that we're trying to remember? One thing I really want to share with you all is wherever you are throughout the Americas, traditionally, you come from a society that's a matriarchal society, which means that the women are the decision makers, they are the knowledge keepers, they are the backbone of the family. And in current time, unfortunately, our women are not held to that power as they have been in the past. But I know that in our hearts and in our families, we see all of the sacrifices and the struggles that women make for us. Again, spirituality, We want to remember that every single thing is sacred, regardless of the religion it's attached to, regardless of the practices that you hold. If something is sacred to you, it is sacred to you. Again, TEK, I'll be referencing this a lot. This means traditional environmental knowledge. And wherever you go in the world, there's different traditional environmental knowledge that you can learn from. So here in particular in California, the indigenous people hold a lot of TEK on specifically using fire on their landscapes. And now that we are not seeing TEK being practiced continuously, we had fire suppressed on the landscape for about 60 plus years. Now in our modern times, we're seeing fires happen all over California at a scale that is not healthy, and it is not traditional as well. And so I want us to remember that we are living in a system where things have been taken from us and things have been given from us. And as we dance through the Chicano experience, this is what we find ourselves dabbling a lot in, right? The world that our ancestors came in and the world that we live in today. Can we move to the next slide, Melina? All right, so now we're gonna get to the meat of how to remember, which is something that I'm really, really passionate about. And I just wanna share with you all a little overview of the 4 herbs that we will be talking about. So we will be talking about nopal, the cactus, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with, but we will go deeper and deeper into all of these plants so that maybe you can learn things about them that you never have. We will be talking about calendula, which is the little orange flower. We will be talking about chamomile or manzanilla, and we will be talking about yerba buena, also known as wild spearmint. We head to the next one. And I do see there's a lot of activity in the chat. So if Malena and Lupe, if you all could just help me answer those questions. Yeah. All right. So the first one, manzanilla or chamomile. How many people here are familiar with this herb? If you could just send something through the chat or put your hand up so I can have an idea. Yeah, I know this one is a popular one. Yeah. So chamomile has made its way into our homes, into our pantries for a number of reasons. And I think one thing I should have shared with you all, the reason that we chose these 4 plants is because we want to respect the land always. And we also want to respect the people that gave us these traditions. And so I will not be sharing anything with you that you cannot access. So all of these plants that we were sharing with you are low impact, they're easy to grow, and you're not taking information from other cultures when you work this relationship with this plant. So the ways that I will be talking about manzanilla is for relaxation, mood support, aiding in digestion, soothing inflammation, whether that be externally or internally. And again, just sharing that it's a good ally for anxiety, insomnia, and inflammation. And so here we have a picture of manzanilla growing in Lupa's yard. And I believe when she got it, it was just a little sprout like this. And with some water, it just kind of spread all over. I do see there's a question. Barbara, if you want to go ahead and ask your question.
I think she had her hand up from who's used manzanilla.
Okay, awesome. No worries. Can we go to the next slide, Melena? All right, so like I said, what's the most important thing to remember is your relationship with the plant. And so some of these uses for manzanilla are super easy and super simple, but again, it's just the act of doing and remembering that brings a lot of wisdom to you. And so there's a picture here of manzanilla in a tea packet in a box. And so if you go to a supermarket like Lola's, which is right down the street for me, and you go to the herbal medicinal tea section, this is a tea that you will always find, which is why I wanted to share it with you all. And the best way to enjoy chamomile is just, to have a tea with it. And so to do that, all you have to do is get 1 tablespoon of the dry herb or 1 packet and add that to boiling water. And if you'd like to use it specifically for your mood and your relaxation, you could add orange or lemon leaf. And the boost of the citrus will kind of make your body move. And so that's one of the small things that I wanted to share with you all. But what I think is really interesting about manzanilla is how strong it is, how gentle yet powerful. And so you actually will see that Ultima uses chamomile in the book. She uses wild chamomile, which is a little different than the one that we're talking about here. But nonetheless, it's a super strong plant that can be used for cleansing and also for reducing inflammation. Another thing that you could all do with chamomile tea, whether that be the bag or if you get some cloth and soak it in a cold tea, is make a compress for your eyes. Like I mentioned, it has a lot of properties that help soothe and reduce inflammation. And so a lot of people use that for their eyes. Even when you drink this as a tea, you're giving yourself a lot of dental oral support because it has been used traditionally as a mouthwash. Folks even use it as an eye wash. They add a little bit of sea salt to it to kind of sterilize the tea and use that internally in their eyes. And so this is just a great example of how strong plants are and how one little plant can do so much for you. And how did manzanilla get into our lives? So manzanilla is actually from Europe. And the way that it arrived in the Americas was during one of the waves of colonization. The Spanish brought it over. And so the name references little apple. And so if you ever smell a manzanilla plant, it has like an apple honey smell to it. And let's move to the next one, which is also a plant that you're all super familiar with.
Yeah, so I think it's important to state that the information that we're sharing today is information that we have learned through our experience with our own guides and teachers. So I really enjoy seeing everyone comment on the chat about, you know, the similarities between your own teachings of your families. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. The nopal is one of my favorite plants. It's also medicinal. It's also sustenance or food. And for Mexico, the nopal is a national symbol of patriotism and culture. It is also the main symbol of on the Mexican flag. For many Mexican and Mexican Americans, it is also a symbol of pride, as well as a life-giving force due to the sustenance it provides and the nourishment it provides our bodies. This plant can also help us connect us to our ancestors and ancestral practices. So for indigenous people of Mexico and other areas of the Southwest, the nopal is interconnected with every aspect of life, from art, culture, food, and medicine. Next slide, please. So one of the recipes that is my go-to is a traditional cold nopal salad that can be used as like a side dish, or it could be like a picadillo or ingredients that you can use to blend into other foods like, you know, huevos revueltos or whatnot. So the cactus has also helps to reduce blood sugar, which we know is something that affects our communities a lot in terms of diabetes. So going back to traditional foods and traditional medicines can help regulate those ailments that our community now finds so common in our communities nowadays. And then with this simple recipe, we can both nourish our spirit by connecting to our ancestral ways, but also lower our blood sugar. The basic, these are all pictures from my and Jessica's backyard. And a simple way to make this is you clean the nopal, and you boil it, you cut it into pieces, and then you basically mix in some of the ingredients on this slide. All of these are optional, and all of these can be replaced with other things to your liking. The picture on the right is the fruit of the nopal, which is the what it's called, the prickly pear, also mentioned in the book. And it is the fruit. It is so sweet. And you can juice it, you can eat it just like you open it and you can just eat it. It has a lot of seeds, but it's so sweet. I've heard Jessica refer to the taste as like tasting a little bit like watermelon. So if some of you haven't tasted it, we do recommend it. And each nopal will, depending on its species, will give a little bit of a different taste to it. Some of them are a little bit more sour. Some of them are a little bit on the sweeter side. So every nopal can produce these and are very very good. Like Jessica said, you can find these also at Mexican supermarkets like Lola's. Next slide, please. Can we go ahead and click the video link? So this is just kind of like an example for folks who are not familiar with the nopal. It does have very spiky thorns all over both the fruit, the cactus pad, but those can just be removed, as you see in the video, just very carefully. And after that, you can eat it. You can go ahead and eat it. So just cautiously and careful, just take those espinas out, and enjoy it in your meal. Next slide, please.
And I just want to say one more thing about the cactus. I know that a lot of us have grown up with it as a food that I compared it to like my spinach. That was my green. And so for a lot of years, I didn't want to eat it. The same with avocado, actually. But something that's really cool about nopal is that it's just now being recognized globally for its value. And so as we move forward with climate change, one of the biggest issues that we're going to have is drought and farming globally. And so nopal is really awesome because it is a desert plant, and so it can establish itself anywhere. And one of the reasons that it has so many seeds, it has like 30 seeds per plant, is to make sure that it survives. And so that's one of the reasons that nopal is associated with survival, because sometimes you look out in the desert landscape and you might not see food, but you'll see a nopal, which means that there's water, which means that there's sugar, which means that there's protein. And so I just want to reemphasize how powerful a nopal is. And anytime you see a cactus that has that shape of a pad, know that it's indigenous to the Americas. And so from all the way from Alaska down to Chile, any cactus that has that pad is edible. So anytime you see a fruit, and if it's a different color, it's edible, it's safe. And in terms of foraging, it's one of the cleanest things that you can get, because you're not taking roots, you're not taking leaves, you're taking from the very, very top of the plant. And because nopal is so hardy and has so many cells, it does a lot of cleansing. So just know that if your neighbor has a nopal, it might be worth asking them if you could get some from their yard. And so now we're going to talk about yerba buena, which is also translated to good herb, or also known as wild spearmint. And I didn't put the scientific name in particular because depending on where you go, you're looking at a different spearmint. So anytime you hear someone say yerba buena, they're talking about a mint in general, but the one that I'm going to be talking about in particular is spearmint, which is a little harder than the mint that we usually have in tea. It's a little thicker and it has kind of more of like a savory taste to it. And all mints aid in digestion. They help relax your muscles in your stomach and your abdomen. So if you're cramping, if you ate something bad, mint is supposed to help alleviate some of that inflammation. My mom uses it to preserve food. So sometimes she'll dry stuff and she'll put leaves of that plant in there. And it's also used for flavoring a lot of broths and soups. I know that Lupe puts that in her broth soups a lot. And that picture there is what the plant looks like when it's growing in the wild. We go to the next slide. And I am going to move a little quicker just so you all know, so that we can make sure we have time for the Q&A. But how you know you're looking at Yerba Buena or spearmint, so it's a vine, and the thing that's really exciting about it is it can grow from like one leaf. Any mint can do that. Spearmint, chocolate mint, orange mint, any mint can grow once it gets its stem into the ground. It will give roots. It will start establishing itself and making itself home there. And so if you're looking to start an herb garden, this is a really great plant to start with. You can literally just cut someone's plant and then stick it in the ground, and it will give roots with permission from your neighbor. And like I mentioned, it's low maintenance and it grows abundantly. And so something that we forget is that plants need animals. And so sometimes you go on a hike and people say, oh, we don't touch the plant. We don't want to disturb the plant. Actually, plants need stimulation. They need animals to come and cut it so that it can continue growing, so it can remember that it's needed and that it has uses that it needs to keep surviving for. So like I mentioned, wherever you go, you're going to be looking at a different Yerba Buena, but the one that I'm talking about in particular, and that is used in a lot of Mexican dishes, is actually an indigenous mint to California. So when the Spanish got here, they saw this mint just covering the hillsides of oaks and other woodlands. And so they named it good herb, Yerba Buena. And so that name has kind of spread throughout Mexico, and it's used in a lot of different places. But mints can be used interchangeably throughout your recipes, right? A mint is a mint. There's a little bit of differences, but the majority of them taste the same. And I added some things about what it does for the land. So one of the reasons that they call it good herb is because they saw that it was just growing everywhere. And one of the reasons that it does that is because it doesn't need a lot of support. And so a plant probably established itself on a hillside, got some shade, got some water, and just started spreading all over. And if you were to put this in your yard, I would recommend to get the native plant that is indigenous to California, because you'll be helping out a lot of the insects, a lot of the animals that also rely on this plant. And know that that is available to you as well. And the best way to use this is just to make a tea. And you can do this fresh, or you could do this dried. I would say if you want more of like a medicinal tea, to drink something hot, but if you want something more relaxed, like just like a tea that you want to mix with honey or something like that, you can go ahead and make your hot tea and then cool it. And once it's cooled, it has a completely different effect. It has what's known as a cooling effect on the inside of your body. And another thing I just want to say really quickly about mint is that mints can always be combined with other elements like air or like water to make it more powerful. So if you want to get some mint and put it in your shower and tie it at the top, as you take a shower, that hot water will pull out the volatile oils and bring them into the air, and you'll start cleaning your sinuses. You'll start cleaning your passageways. And so I know as we move forward into the summer, one thing we really need to consider is our lungs and being able to cleanse them, and know that there's a lot of aromatic plants that can support you with that. We go to the next one, Malena. All right, the last one, which is one of my favorite plants, I'm kind of obsessed with it, is calendula. And this is a plant that Lupe and I both grew up with a lot in our lives and still use it today. So we're looking at calendula, which is also known as pot marigold, not to be confused with Mexican marigolds, which is the cempasúchil that I showed you a while ago. And the biggest difference from that is that cempasúchil has a bitter smell. It has more of a vinegar smell, and calendula has more of a sweet marshmallowy smell. That's one of the biggest ways that you can see the difference. But calendula is so soothing. It's used for anything that irritated inside or outside of you, promotes tissue healing after injuries, whether that be a burn, whether that be a bruise, soothes your eye irritation, soothes your gut irritation. It does a lot for women's health for people that menstruate. I know that this is a oil that I use a lot in the balms that I seek out for when I'm having cramps. It has countless medicinal properties when it comes to being an aid in relaxation and being gentle with you. It kind of reminds you that sometimes the biggest, heaviest issues need just some gentle love, support, and tender care to get us through. Can we move to the next one, Malena? And so really briefly, just to share about calendula before Lupe or I get into this, calendula seeds are really easy to find. And if you put a seed down, within 2 weeks, you'll have a flower head. And so if you want to make something like a lotion or an oil, you can go ahead and put the seeds down today. And in about a month or so, you'll most likely be able to harvest and make something for yourself. And so this is a picture of a recipe that Lupe made with Farming for Health. And I think I'll go ahead and let her share about this if she would like to.
Yeah, so another thing to mention about calendula is that it also self-seeds itself. So if you plant it in a corner of your garden, it will self-seed and spread to other areas. So like Rafa was saying in the chat, like hierbabuena, calendula is a great plant to put in pots if you want to keep it a little bit more contained. And so like Jess was saying, calendula has really strong medicinal properties to help with irritation, burns, or cuts and scrapes. And so we put together a balm in which we used a combination of other plants like plantain, comfrey, and the calendula oil to make like a neosporin type home remedy that is probably just as powerful or if not more powerful than what you can buy at the drugstore. So what we did here is we got dry calendula flowers, which is really important because the fresh calendulas have still some water in it, and the water in the fresh flowers or your herbs can cause molds or fungus to grow in your oil or in whatever medicinal recipe you want to use them with. So which is why oftentimes it's better to use the dry herb, which you see on the bottom left is the dry flower head. And so we literally just combined the dried flowers, plantain and comfrey into a jar with some organic extra virgin olive oil to use as the carrier oil. And we let it sit for about 2 weeks, shaking it regularly. We just left it on the windowsill and shook it regularly to kind of stir in the ingredients. And once, about 2 weeks, the longer you let it sit, the more potent, the more time the herbs have to release their medicine into the oil. But 2 weeks is good. And then you strain it using like a cloth or whatever you have to just kind of, get just the oil. And we combined it with about a tablespoon of beeswax over a like pot. Some people they get fancy with their things, but if you have like a pot, then you can just put a plate over it to let it steam. And then you just add the ingredients and you stir it until the beeswax melts into your carrier oil. And then you just put it into little containers, little jars. You let it cool. And the beeswax is the agent that will help solidify your balm. The more beeswax you use, the harder your balm is. So if you want a really soft, creamy balm, then use less beeswax. If you want something hard, something more like a chapstick kind of thing, then use a little bit extra beeswax. And once it's cooled off and solidifies, you can begin applying it over your skin, scrapes, cuts, bruises, keeping in mind that the cut, if it's too deep of a cut, you will need other things. And this is not necessarily used for really deep wounds, but superficial scrapes, cuts, and bruises, this is a great thing. If people have, children, this is a good mix, a good balm that you can make at your home to help your, your children also heal with this like soft yet powerful medicine. Next slide, please.
So here's just a picture of the oil and then the salve. And so I think just one thing to clarify. So just so you all know, a salve is something that comes in like a container like this. And usually, like Lupe mentioned, it's thicker, so it has more beeswax. But if you are anxious about heating things up in the crock pot or melting things, you can just make it an oil, which just is the same exact steps, but you don't use beeswax. You just literally leave the flowers in there, shake them up, make sure that they don't rot, and then afterwards you'll be left with this beautiful color. And this is all from the petals of the flower. That's all I wanted to add.
Next slide, please. Oh, so someone said, can it go bad after a long time? I was going to type it in the chat, but I'll just say it. Since you aren't using any preservatives, it is best to use it to make small batches and use it within 6 months or so, because there aren't any preservatives like what you buy at the store that have a longer shelf life. When you make your own medicine, you can go ahead and make your oil in bulk. Kind of like I have here, I don't know if you can see here. I have a jar of oil, of calendula oil that I made, and this will literally last years in here. But when you actually turn it into medicine, you want to use it within 6 months. But which is why, if you have your oil with your herbs, your preferred herbs, you can always just, store it in a dark, cool place and make your medicine in small batches. Cool. So extra resources. We just kind of wanted to provide some books that we have used, and some of these we borrowed from the library. Bless Me Ultima, as you read through the book, Ultima also shows Antonio different herbs like Osha, Hierbabuena, and Manzanilla, I believe is even in the book. And she will kind of like, in her own way, teach Antonio. So we wanted to put this in here, but also wanted to put the pictures of our family members and community members, because we want to remember that they are also our traditional knowledge keepers and our first teachers of medicine. So we invite you to go to the people in your lives, your mentors, your teachers, your family, whoever it is, and maybe ask if this conversation has never come up. And I hope that you are pleasantly surprised with the information that they can offer.
Yeah, and I just want to add, for myself, I know that the way that I learned about plants was listening to people talk about plants. And so it took me a long time to realize what the heck they were talking about. And so the photo in the top left is really funny to me. It's my mom making my brother collect rose hips, and he's not too into it, but he understands the importance of spending time with my mom. And I just want to share that if you do talk with your families, and ask them what their favorite remedy is, they might be really honored. They might not have had that conversation with you as a child because, they think you didn't care, right? But now that we're adults and we're learning to live on our own and take care of ourselves, it's a really great opportunity to connect and ask those questions that we couldn't ask when we were younger. Can you go to the next slide, Melina? And so more resources for you all. If you want to go ahead and buy plants here in Sonoma County, I put some of shops that I recommend buying. So I saw in the chat some things were coming up about chemicals, about buying ethically. And so I recommend either growing your own plants, getting it from a friend, and then buying it from the store. Oh my gosh, my laptop just died.
You're still there. Oh,
okay. So what she was going to say is that here we have also some local herbal shops that know how to use these herbs in a sustainable way and have grown these herbs here locally as a way to connect with the herbs and plants that we shared. So if you don't necessarily have them in your garden, or if you don't necessarily, you know, we don't encourage foraging. So if you want access to these, here are some places that you can go to get some of these herbs that are safe, organic, local, and farmed in a sustainable way, and also supporting local shops. So we also invite you to, visit your native nurseries. I know some people in the chat have reached out to us and asked where can they find, certain herbs. And local nurseries will often have a plethora of options for starting our own home garden. Next slide, please. So thank you so much for joining us in this presentation. We hope that you gathered some inspiration and found some connection in what we had to share. Because like Rodolfo Anaya stated about his book, is that it's really about the human experience, and that is something that all of us can relate to. So we honor and thank you for your time. If you have any questions, we are more than happy to stay here and answer some of those for a few more minutes. But also, here is our information. You can stay connected with us through LandPaths, our Instagram and Facebook accounts, and also look for other events that LandPaths is hosting via the calendar of events on the LandPaths website. And I believe Jessica is also writing our emails on the chat.